Hi there, good evening and welcome to St Andrew's Reflections for Wednesday the 22nd of April. I've been reading the papers recently and perhaps it's not surprising that the Church has received both positive and negative comments in the press. The Daily Telegraph made the comment about some of the Easter worship and about churches being closed and about virtual worship. One comment in the Telegraph said this: "It has been an Easter like no other, separated from families, shrunken festive lunches, empty streets," and then went on to say about closed churches too, where churches of all kinds of descriptions were forced to shut their doors to worshippers for the first time in hundreds of years. And yes, speaking as both clergy, a minister of the United Reformed Church, and an elder of our local church, St Andrew's, having to make that decision to shut our churches, of course on the recommendation of our denomination, was a difficult thing to make, and not something that comes comfortably or naturally, because it's, I suppose, in many ways like a doctor being asked to betray their Hippocratic oath. The idea of closing our doors to people rather than opening them. Normally we look for every opportunity to open our doors, and yet here we were obviously and rightly being encouraged to close them. The papers went on to say that it's not since the height of the Second World War that we've seen anything like this, but even then churches didn't shut their doors in the same way. And papers also said that the Church of England actually ordered the clergy out of their churches and was forbidding them from celebrating services actually from the churches. We haven't taken that step, of course. It's when you've seen the Sunday service, it's just been me at church. But we did see, of course, on our televisions the Archbishop of Canterbury streaming or recording his Easter sermon from the kitchen in his flat at Lambeth Palace. But we also saw the Pope streaming his message from his Easter message from a deserted St. Peter's on Easter Day. The bottom line is we've been called to be a very different kind of church, and to look at being church in very different ways. And of course, the church, with a capital C, is not alone in this. The other great faiths who follow similar paths to us, the Abrahamic faiths, follow a similar pattern. Jewish families, of course, were forced to begin the Passover celebrations without gathering traditionally as they would with friends and family for the Seder meal, which begins always an integral part of the Passover celebrations. Ramadan is due to begin, of course, tomorrow, the holy month for the people of the Muslim faith. Again, it will have to be marked from home. Around all of this, all faiths are having to, or making use of, celebrating our faith online or in other ways. Of course, this does leave some people out, we know that. And here at St Andrews, our pastoral team and our elders are constantly battling with finding other ways to communicate to those who aren't able to get online. And we do this through pastoral phone calls, through our chat circles, through various means of sharing our news and our faith with one another and keeping that contact with those who are feeling most isolated. But the articles in the papers went on to then, in some of their criticisms really, flag up that that maybe some people are worried about what might come after the lockdown. Will people get out of the habit of worship? Will the church, which, let's be honest, in numerical figures is in a decline in the UK and has been for some time, will this exacerbate that situation? I think the evidence would say not. Yes, the church has been criticised for saying stay safe, stay indoors. But then surely we should be saying that, because yes, we need to pass on that message of safety and health for all people and protecting one another, and of course protecting our emergency services, our NHS, and all those who are working still and having to put themselves in dangerous situations to give us our everyday food, to serve us in shops, do all sorts of things, and to make sure our day-to-day living is keeping going. So yes, we need to stress that. But the criticism that also came from the papers that we weren't giving a message of hope. But I would disagree with that, because I think what I've seen from the churches during this time and from individual Christians more than any other time is that people are talking about and sharing their faith. And I encourage you to do exactly the same. Because we're reminded in this, and an article in The Guardian went on to say that the church isn't made up of bricks and mortar, it's made of people. We've been saying that for years. I'm glad the press have caught up with it. But in Britain, internet services have generated, and this counts for us too, accounted more interest and more attendees than we do on a Sunday. We must be doing something right. So there are more people becoming interested in church, maybe, and maybe you're one of those listening to me right now, who are taking this opportunity, this time and space to explore your faith. One of the things my great heroine, the great art commentator, Sister Wendy Beckett, Carmelite nun, who I love dearly, has always said about prayer is the problem is that people don't make time to pray. We have that time now. Make use of it. But I also want to draw on partly on the tradition she comes from, but also to say that I've found this lockdown in many ways like a monastic experience. I've long been interested in monastic traditions, and if I'm honest, have some kind of weird craving for that kind of monastic life. And I think if we look at that way of living, we're encouraged to we could look at the positives of lockdown and how we can learn from monastic communities as to how we might live through these coming days. Because when you look at the monastic life, at the monastic experience at a very basic level, what you see is a contained life, and yet in many ways looking outwards. You see a life that is about serving others, and yet about taking care of yourself. You see a life that is about loving God, and yet also loving our neighbour. You see a simplified way of living, and yet also a very focused way of living. We can learn a lot from ancient and more recent monastic traditions, whether it be Benedictine, Franciscan, Carmelite, whichever you want to do. I'm a great fan of Abbot Christopher Jameson. Some of you may remember it was his abbey that was involved in the series The Monastery some years ago, where people from outside were encouraged to go and live a monastic life for a short time. He's written 2 great books, Finding Happiness, that's one of them, that's one I'm trying to read at the moment, and Finding Sanctuary, which is a great book which I'd encourage you to read. It's about finding sanctuary in our everyday life. Read both these books because they do encourage us to embrace the positives of monastic life and how we might apply those to our everyday living. And maybe now is the time to do that more than ever, because I believe from these monastic traditions we can learn how to be positive in our current lockdown situation. We can learn to be hopeful in our current situation, and we can learn to live out that Easter message in a new and different way, but learning from some of our great traditions of the past. Help yourself in this current situation by embracing those traditions. And into that context, I want to read to you one of the readings from last Sunday. It's the New Testament reading, which comes from the book of Acts, beginning in Acts chapter 2, verse 14, and then jumps to verse 22 through to verse 32. But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. You that are Israelites, listen to what I have to say. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with deeds of power, wonders, and signs of God, did through him among you, as you yourselves know. This man handed over to you according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. You crucified and killed by the hands of those outside the law. But God raised him up, having freed him from death, because it was impossible for him to be held in its power. For David says concerning him, I saw the Lord always before me, for he is at my right hand, so I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart was glad and my tongue rejoiced. Moreover, my flesh will live in hope. For you will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let the Holy One experience corruption. You have made known to me the ways of life. You will make me full of gladness with your presence. Peter carries on saying, Fellow Israelites, I may say to you confidently of our ancestor David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Since he was a prophet, he knew that God had sworn with an oath to him that he would put one of his descendants on his throne. For seeing this, David spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah, saying, He was not abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh experience corruption. This Jesus God raised up, and of that all of us are witnesses. We can be positive. We have a lot to learn from our old and ancient Christian traditions. Clear away some of the more recent ones, maybe, but we have so much rich tradition that we can learn about and build on for today. Be positive, be hopeful, embrace Christ in the world today, and explore what monastic life might mean in a real world situation for you today, because I believe it has a lot to offer. I want to conclude with a prayer from Iona, and it's from the Iona Abbey worship book. Another great monastic community, which if you've never been part of, I encourage you to go at some point. But their prayer comes from their service of healing. So let us pray. Loving God, you gather us together, not in body, but in mind and spirit. Here, where many have come before us seeking your healing, strength, and love. You know us, God. You understand who we are. You know what troubles and puzzles us, what makes us smile, and what makes us sad. You listen to our questions and our prayers. You know the people we love, God, and the people we struggle with. Sometimes we hurt others, sometimes we hurt ourselves. So we bring our own hurt, asking for your healing. And we bring the hurt we have caused others, asking for forgiveness. Listen to these words of Jesus, words that we can trust. Don't be afraid. I love you. Your sins are forgiven. I will be with you always. Write these words on our hearts, loving God. Let them take root in our living. Amen. Like I say, look into some of our monastic traditions. Learn what it can mean for you today. Be positive about our current lockdown situation and be hopeful for Christ is with us today and alive. Amen.